Cassie used to think heartbreak was loud, screaming, shattered glass, doors slammed hard enough to wake the whole town. But the day Dylan left her, it was quiet. So quiet it felt like the world had forgotten to breathe. He didn't leave with cruelty. He left with avoidance, the kind that looks like pride from the outside but feels like fear when it's living inside a man's chest. One moment, his hands were on her waist in their tiny kitchen, the smell of coffee and rain drifting through the screen door. And the next, his suitcase was by the porch steps, his eyes fixed anywhere but her face. No long explanation, no real goodbye, just a sentence that didn't fit the life they'd built. "I can't do this right now." And then the truck lights vanished down the road like a promise being erased. Weeks passed, then months. Seasons rolled over the town like pages. Stormy spring, scorching summer, a fall that turned the fields gold, and a winter that made everything look frozen and untouched, even when Cassie wasn't. She learned how to carry pain with dignity, how to work through tears without letting anyone hear them, how to rebuild a life that didn't depend on someone coming back to finish what they broke. And slowly, she stopped waiting. She started becoming. Not the girl Dylan left behind. Soft with hope, willing to bend, willing to forgive too fast. But a woman with boundaries. A woman with quiet strength. A woman who turned grief into growth and loneliness into purpose. So when the New Year air finally came, sharp and clean like it was cutting old endings off the calendar, Cassie believed she'd closed the chapter for good. Until the day Dylan came back, not as the boy who ran, but as a man carrying something heavier than luggage, regret. And the look in his eyes wasn't confidence anymore. It was the raw, shaking truth of someone who finally understood what he'd destroyed. The town saw him first. Whispers moved faster than wind through cornfields. Dylan's back. And Cassie didn't run to the window. She didn't fall apart. She didn't even flinch. Because the real question wasn't whether he could return. It was this. Was it too late to earn the love of a woman who had already learned how to live without him? Stay with this story until the end, because the moment Cassie finally stands in front of Dylan again, it won't be to beg him to love her. It will be to decide if he deserves the life she rebuilt without him. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself after someone walked away, subscribe to Redeemed Hearts and comment "I'm choosing myself." Because this story might remind you that the love meant for you will never require you to lose yourself to be kept. Cassie remembered the kitchen first. Not the fight, not the words, just the light. Morning sun spilled over the chipped counter, turning the coffee mug into something almost holy. Outside, the field still wore a thin coat of frost, and the town felt small enough to hold in one hand. Dylan stood there like a man trying not to tremble. He had slept beside her, but he hadn't rested. All night he'd stared at the ceiling in silence, carrying thoughts he never translated into honesty. Cassie noticed the distance before it had a name, the way his touch paused, the way his breathing changed. When she asked, "Is something wrong?" he smiled too fast, and that smile told her the truth was already leaving. Dylan had always been ambitious, quietly, dangerously. He wasn't the kind of man who bragged about dreams. He carried them like a private religion. A bigger city, bigger deals, a future that moved faster. He said he wanted more, but never explained what it cost. Cassie had loved him anyway, even when his eyes drifted away, because she believed love could grow roots deep enough. That morning, his phone rang twice, and he didn't answer. The second time, he stepped onto the porch and Cassie watched his shoulders tighten under his jacket. A wind pushed through the yard, sharp and impatient, rattling the porch swing like a warning. When he came back in, he didn't meet her gaze. He stared at the floor as if it could save him. "I need to talk," he said, and Cassie's stomach dropped. Not because she feared the talk, but because she knew he'd rehearsed it without her. She set the mug down slowly, steady hands, steady breath, like calm could stop a hurricane from forming. "Okay," she answered, voice soft, spine straight. Dylan swallowed hard, then looked past her shoulder. He started with a lie dressed as care. "It's not you," he said, like every coward says first. Cassie didn't argue. She waited because she deserved clarity. He rubbed his palms together as if guilt had a temperature. I'm not ready, he added, and the words sounded small. Not ready for what? A life? A home? A promise? Cassie's heart beat once, hard enough to bruise. She stepped closer, searching his face for the real reason. They had built routines together. Farmers market Saturdays, late-night drives, hospital shifts that left her exhausted. His steady arms around her when the world felt heavy. And yet, in that moment, he felt like a stranger wearing Dylan's skin. What happened? She asked. And her voice didn't break. I thought we were building something. Dylan's jaw tightened, pride fighting fear behind his eyes. I can't do this right now, he said too quickly, as if the sentence had been loaded and fired before he could stop it. Cassie blinked once, slow, like her body refused to understand. Do what? She asked, because she needed him to be specific. Be accountable. Be human. Don't hide behind vague endings. But Dylan only shook his head, trapped in his own silence. The suitcase appeared like a betrayal made physical. Cassie hadn't heard him pack, hadn't seen him choose departure. It sat near the door, innocent as any object, yet it carried the weight of a life he was abandoning. Her throat tightened, but she didn't beg. She had promised herself, long ago, she would never chase love. Not love that had to be convinced to stay. You're leaving, she said. And it wasn't a question. Dylan's eyes finally met hers, and flinched. In them, Cassie saw it clearly. He wasn't angry. He wasn't cruel. He was afraid. Afraid of being needed. Afraid of failing, afraid of forever, and instead of facing fear like a man, he chose escape like a boy. Cassie's pain sharpened into something colder, understanding. If you walk out, she said quietly, it changes everything. Her voice had no drama, no performance, only truth. Dylan inhaled like he might reconsider, but pride is louder than conscience when a man is still immature. I'll call, he promised, the kind of promise that costs nothing. Cassie nodded once, not because she believed him, but because she refused to argue with a decision already made. He reached for her, then stopped halfway, the space between them filled with all the things he wouldn't say. Cassie stood still, letting him feel what absence would mean. When his hand finally touched her shoulder, it was brief, apologetic. Not love, not commitment, just a gesture to soothe his own guilt. Cassie didn't lean into it. She didn't give him comfort for leaving, and Dylan's eyes flickered with something like shame. The door opened with a slow creak like the house protesting. Cold air rushed in, sharp as truth on bare skin. Dylan carried the suitcase out without looking back, and Cassie watched him cross the porch steps, as if she were watching a man step off a bridge. The truck started, engine growling like a final warning. Then the tires rolled down the driveway, and the sound faded. Cassie didn't collapse right away. She stood in the doorway until the road swallowed him, until the last red glow of the taillights disappeared. Only then did she close the door with careful hands, like if she slammed it, she'd break something she could never repair. She leaned her forehead against the wood and closed her eyes. Her breath came out in one shaky exhale she couldn't control. The town kept moving, because towns always do. A tractor passed on the road. A dog barked somewhere. A neighbor's radio played a song too cheerful for that moment. Cassie walked back to the kitchen and stared at the coffee mug, still warm, still waiting, still ordinary. And she realized heartbreak wasn't loud at all. It was the quiet of a life suddenly missing its other half. Her phone stayed silent that day. No message, no explanation, no "I'm sorry," just the empty space where certainty used to live. Cassie sat at the table with her hands folded, feeling the strange humiliation of being left without a reason. And then something in her hardened, not into bitterness, but into resolve. She got up, washed the mug, and wiped the counter clean. Not because she felt fine, but because she refused to let abandonment ruin her discipline. She called the clinic to confirm her shift, then tied her hair back like a woman preparing for war. In the mirror, her eyes looked swollen, but they still held fire, and she whispered, "I will not disappear because he did." Before leaving the house, Cassie wrote one sentence on a sticky note. She pressed it to the fridge where Dylan used to stand at night, snacking in silence, pretending he wasn't scared of the future. The note didn't beg, didn't curse, didn't plead for answers. It simply said, "If you come back, you'll meet a different woman." Cassie grabbed her keys, stepped into the cold morning, and drove toward a life she would build with her own hands. Cassie learned quickly that silence has a price. It shows up in the late afternoon when work is done, when the house is too quiet to pretend it's peaceful. It settles in the corners like dust you can't see, and then it lands in your chest when you least expect it. She kept moving anyway because stopping felt dangerous. If she stopped, she might start hoping again. At the clinic, her hands stayed steady. She changed bandages, held trembling fingers, and spoke in a calm voice that made patients feel safe. But sometimes, in the hallway between rooms, she would hear Dylan's name in her own memory. Not spoken, just echoing, like a door that never fully closed. Cassie would inhale, count to 5, and keep walking. The town noticed his absence the way it notices weather. Not with cruelty at first, more like curiosity. At the diner, a waitress asked, "How's Dylan doing?" Cassie smiled politely and said, "Busy," as if that explained it. At the grocery store, an older woman patted her arm too gently. Cassie thanked her, then left with her bags held too tightly. Pity felt like another kind of abandonment. Bills didn't care about heartbreak. The mortgage notice arrived like a blunt reminder that love never paid for groceries when it left. Cassie sat at the table under the yellow kitchen light, stacking envelopes with the same precision she used at work. She adjusted her budget, cut the extras, canceled what she could. Then she wrote a plan, because panic wasn't allowed to win. Some nights, she drove to the edge of town. There was a stretch of road by the fields where the sky opened wide and the stars looked closer. She'd park with the engine off and let the cold seep in, not as punishment but as proof she could endure discomfort. Her phone would sit in her lap like a silent dare. Cassie never called him. Not once. Dylan didn't call either. Not that day. Not that week. His promised "I'll call" dissolved into nothing like breath on winter glass. Cassie checked her voicemail only once, then stopped. She refused to train her heart to jump at empty sounds. Waiting was a habit she would not keep feeding. Instead, she built new habits like bricks. Early mornings at the clinic, extra shifts when someone needed help. Weekends volunteering at the community pantry behind the church. Evenings learning how to fix small things around the house, watching tutorials, holding tools with determined hands. She wasn't trying to become stronger for a comeback story. She was becoming stable for her own survival. When grief came, it came without permission. It appeared in the scent of Dylan's old cologne on a scarf, in a song playing softly from a passing truck, in the way certain jokes still lived in the air between rooms. Cassie would pause, press 2 fingers to her wrist, and remind herself her pulse was proof she was still here. Then she would choose the next right thing. Her friend Marla tried once, gently. "You don't have to carry this alone," she said, eyes kind. Cassie didn't cry. She simply nodded and stared into her tea, because the truth wasn't that she was alone. The truth was that she had been left while standing beside someone. That kind of loneliness rewires a person. Cassie wasn't sure she could explain it without breaking. One afternoon, an elderly patient took Cassie's hand. "You look like a woman who's been through a storm," she said. Cassie smiled, the practiced one that didn't reveal too much. The patient squeezed harder, like she wasn't fooled. "Honey, storms don't ask permission," the woman whispered. "But they do pass and you will still be standing." Cassie swallowed, eyes stinging, and thanked her softly. She started writing at night, not poetry, truth. Short sentences, honest ones, like nails holding a frame together. "I miss him, but I don't miss who I became with his uncertainty. I loved him, but love without safety is not a home. I am allowed to be angry without becoming bitter." The pages filled quietly and Cassie felt something loosen. Not the pain, just the chokehold it had on her days. A month later, she found his spare key in a drawer. It sat on her palm like a small piece of the past. Cassie stared at it for a long time, breathing slow. Then she walked to the back porch and stepped into the cold. She didn't throw it into the field, dramatic and final. She placed it in a small envelope and labeled it carefully. Dylan. Return only with truth. The first real test came with a town fundraiser. The clinic needed supplies and everyone showed up to help. Cassie stood behind a table of donated pies, smiling and thanking people. Then a man she barely knew leaned in and murmured, "Seems like Dylan couldn't handle a woman like you." Cassie's smile faded, her eyes steady as glass. "Don't make my pain your entertainment," she said, and turned away. That night she went home and didn't feel victorious. Her hands shook as she unlocked the door, not from fear but from the exhaustion of being watched. Cassie kicked off her boots and stood in the hallway, listening to the empty house echo back her footsteps. She pressed her palm to the wall, grounding herself. Then she whispered, "I'm still here," as if the house needed to know. She changed the furniture on a Saturday morning, not because a couch could heal her, but because she needed the room to stop remembering him. She moved the armchair to a different corner, pushed the table closer to the window, hung a new curtain. The space looked unfamiliar in a way that felt strangely kind. Cassie realized she wasn't erasing Dylan, she was reclaiming herself. At the end of the second month, she made a list. Not of things she missed, but of things she wanted. Peace that didn't depend on someone else's moods. A partnership that didn't vanish when life got serious. A love that showed up on ordinary Tuesdays, not just in good seasons. Cassie stared at the list until her throat stopped tightening. Then she folded it and placed it in her journal like a vow. Winter arrived fully, frosting the fields white. The air turned sharp, the sunsets earlier, and Cassie discovered she could survive the dark evenings. She cooked for herself, lit candles, played music, and learned to enjoy quiet without confusing it for abandonment. Some nights she still cried, softly, privately, honestly. But she always woke up the next morning and chose her life again. On New Year's Eve, the town gathered for fireworks by the lake. Cassie stood among familiar faces, wrapped in a thick coat, watching sparks burst into color against the black sky. When everyone cheered, she didn't wish for Dylan to return. She wished for courage, for healing, for a future she could trust. As the last firework faded, Cassie exhaled and smiled to herself, because somewhere inside her, a new beginning had already started. By the time the first thaw softened the edges of winter, Cassie's life no longer looked like something waiting to be rescued. The lake still carried thin sheets of ice at dawn, but the roads were clearer, the mornings brighter, the air gentler. She walked into the clinic each day with purpose in her stride, and the town began to speak her name with a different tone. Not pity anymore, respect. Cassie had become the kind of woman people relied on. She organized supply drives without announcing them. She stayed late to comfort a frightened patient, then drove home with the radio off, letting quiet be her companion. When the community pantry ran low, she made calls and filled boxes. She didn't do it for praise, and that made it more powerful. Pain had taught her how to serve without losing herself. There were still moments of ache, but they were quieter now. The sting no longer controlled the day. It only visited. Cassie learned the difference between missing someone and wanting them back. She could miss Dylan's laughter and still refuse his absence. She could remember his warmth and still require safety. That distinction felt like the beginning of wisdom. On a Thursday morning, the clinic's director called her into the office. "We're expanding," Dr. Hensley said, adjusting her glasses. "County funding finally came through, and we need leadership." Cassie's pulse quickened, not from fear, from the weight of something earned. "We want you to coordinate the new outreach program," the doctor added. Cassie nodded slowly, as if accepting a sacred responsibility. The outreach meant farms, back roads, and homes too far from town. It meant elderly patients with no transportation, families who delayed care because they couldn't afford time away from work. Cassie built a schedule, recruited volunteers, and created a plan. She spoke with steady authority at the town meeting, and the room listened like they trusted her to carry them forward. Cassie walked out into the sunlight feeling taller. That afternoon, she stopped at Miller's Market for supplies. The bell above the door rang as she stepped in, and the smell of fresh bread wrapped around her like comfort. She nodded to familiar faces, exchanged quick hellos, then paused near the notice board by the register. A new flyer was pinned there, crisp and official. Community Outreach Clinic, now accepting volunteers. She scanned the list, already calculating what she'd need. Then she heard it. Two men talking near the produce. Heard Dylan's company is buying land out west. One said, "Yeah." The other replied, "Someone said he's coming back through town." Cassie didn't turn her head. She didn't freeze. She simply picked up a bag of apples and kept breathing. The old Cassie would have felt the floor tilt. She would have replayed memories like a desperate prayer, imagining a return as a healing miracle. But the Cassie standing in that market now felt something different. A calm skepticism, like a scar that had learned its own strength. If Dylan returned, it wouldn't rewrite the past. It would only reveal who he was now. Back at home, she opened the windows and let air move through. She washed sheets, folded laundry, cleaned the kitchen. Not from nervousness, but from habit, from self-respect. Her phone sat on the counter, silent as always. No apology had ever arrived. No explanation. Cassie poured herself tea and sat by the window, watching fields stretch toward the horizon like a reminder of distance. That night, Marla called. "I'm not trying to stir anything," Marla said carefully. "But I heard something I think you should know." Cassie listened without tension in her shoulders. Marla continued. "People are saying Dylan's back in the area, like, really back." Cassie's throat tightened for a second, then released. "Okay," she answered softly. "Thank you for telling me." After the call, Cassie went to her journal. She didn't write paragraphs, just one line. "If he returns, I will not become my old self to meet him." She stared at the sentence until it felt steady. Then she closed the notebook and turned off the lamp. In the dark, she didn't imagine romance. She imagined boundaries, truth, and the courage to hold them. 2 days later, a late winter storm rolled in. Snow fell in heavy, silent sheets, softening the world. Cassie drove carefully to the clinic, windshield wipers steady, and the sky looked like it was holding its breath. She walked into the lobby and heard nurses whispering, not gossip, concern. "There was an accident on Route 9, someone said. "A bad one." Cassie's shift became a blur of triage and focus. A teenage boy with a broken wrist. An elderly woman, shaken but stable. A farmer who couldn't stop apologizing for bleeding on the floor. Cassie moved with practiced calm, voice warm but firm. She guided patients, directed volunteers, steadied trembling hands. And then the ambulance doors opened again, and the air changed. 2 paramedics wheeled in a man with a bruised cheekbone, a cut near his eyebrow, and snow melting into his dark hair. His coat looked expensive, out of place among working boots and denim. Cassie glanced up automatically, ready to assess, and time slowed in the cruelest way. Because she recognized the shape of his jaw, the familiar line of his mouth, even before his eyes opened. Dylan's gaze lifted, unfocused at first, then sharp with recognition. For a heartbeat, Cassie saw panic, raw and immediate. Not fear of injury, fear of her. Fear of what he would find in the woman he left behind. Cassie's body stayed still, disciplined, professional. But her heart struck once, hard enough to echo, and she did not move toward him. A nurse beside her whispered, "Do you know him?" Cassie didn't answer right away, because the question wasn't simple anymore. Did she know the man on that stretcher, or did she know the boy who had abandoned her in a quiet kitchen? Cassie swallowed and nodded once. "Yes," she said, voice steady as glass. "I know who he used to be." Dylan tried to speak, but the paramedic interrupted. "Possible concussion," he said, reading off details. Cassie stepped closer, not as a lover, but as a woman with training and control. She checked his pupils, asked him simple questions, monitored his breathing. Dylan's eyes stayed locked on hers, full of a desperate apology he couldn't say out loud. Cassie kept her tone neutral because she refused to collapse. When Dylan was moved to a room for observation, Cassie stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door. The storm outside pressed snow against the windows like a warning. Behind that door was the past, breathing, injured, returned. Cassie's fingers curled around her clipboard until her knuckles went pale. She exhaled slowly, choosing strength over instinct. Because Dylan was back, and this time, Cassie would decide what happened next. Dylan's name moved through the clinic like electricity. Not shouted, whispered, carried carefully from station to station. People didn't say it with admiration or scandal. They said it like a weather alert. Be aware. Cassie walked down the hallway with measured steps, clipboard pressed to her chest, face calm and unreadable. Inside, her pulse kept trying to sprint. Room 6 smelled like antiseptic and melted snow. The heater hummed softly, fighting the cold that Dylan had brought in. He lay on the bed with a bandage near his eyebrow, a bruise blooming across his cheekbone like punishment. For a moment he looked younger. Not the confident man the town had imagined, but someone caught between regret and fear. Cassie paused at the doorway, then stepped in without hesitation. Dylan tried to sit up. "Cassie," he said, voice rough as if her name scraped his throat. Cassie held up a hand immediately, not cruel, just firm. "Don't," she answered quietly. Not don't talk, don't perform. Don't try to soften the moment with familiarity you no longer earned. Dylan swallowed hard and sank back against the pillow. Cassie checked his chart with professional distance. Blood pressure stable, no internal bleeding, possible mild concussion, orders for observation and rest. She asked him standard questions, voice even. Any dizziness, nausea, pain level from 1 to 10? Dylan answered, but his eyes stayed on her face, like he was trying to memorize the woman he had abandoned. Cassie wrote notes without looking up. When the medical questions ended, silence filled the room. It wasn't comfortable silence. It was the silence of unfinished truths. Dylan's fingers flexed against the sheet as if he wanted to reach for her. He didn't. That restraint looked like respect, or fear of being rejected. Cassie finally met his gaze, calm as a winter lake. "You're back," she said, factual, not emotional. Dylan nodded once, shame heavy in his posture. "I didn't plan this," Dylan murmured, gesturing weakly. Cassie's expression didn't change. "You didn't plan leaving either," she replied, voice low. The words landed like a quiet strike. Dylan closed his eyes for a second, absorbing the truth. "I know," he said. Cassie stopped him with a look sharp enough to cut. "Don't explain with excuses," she said. "Not yet." Dylan opened his eyes again, and they were different. Not slick with charm, not protected by arrogance, just raw. Honest. Frightened in a grown man way. "I'm not here to hurt you," he whispered. Cassie's mouth tightened, not with anger, with the exhaustion of hearing words that once meant nothing. "You weren't here when you did," she answered softly. He stared at her like he deserved the pain in her voice. "I should have called," Dylan said. Cassie's laugh came out once, small and bitter, then gone. "You should have stayed," she replied, and her eyes didn't blink. Dylan's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "I was scared," he admitted, the confession cracking. Cassie tilted her head slightly. "Of what?" Dylan hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything. He was scared of being needed, scared of failing in a life that required consistency, scared that love would expose what success could hide. Cassie saw it all in the way he struggled to speak, but she didn't rescue him with sympathy. "I don't have time for half-truths," she said, voice quiet and clean. "If you're here, be here completely, or don't be here at all." Dylan nodded slowly, as if hearing a sentence he'd earned. A knock interrupted them. A nurse stepped in with medication and instructions. Cassie shifted back into her role, explaining dosage and rest. Dylan listened obediently, eyes lowered, hands still. The nurse left, and the room returned to its quiet tension. Dylan cleared his throat. "Can we talk? After my discharge?" Cassie didn't answer immediately. She studied him the way she studied a wound, carefully, clinically. Cassie's boundary rose like a wall built from months of survival. "You don't get access because you're sorry," she said. Her tone wasn't cruel, it was mature. Dylan flinched as if the sentence had physical weight. "I know," he whispered. Cassie continued. "You don't get closeness because you came back." She stepped closer, eyes steady. You get what you earn, Dylan. And you start by telling the truth. Dylan's face tightened, then softened into surrender. The truth is, I was ashamed, he said. Cassie's brows drew together, surprised despite herself. Of what? She asked again, refusing vague answers. Dylan stared at the ceiling like it might hold courage. I didn't feel like enough, he admitted. My success was growing, but inside I felt small. Cassie felt a flicker of something, then extinguished it with discipline, because his insecurity didn't excuse her pain. Not now. Not ever. Cassie breathed slowly, letting silence do its work. Then she said, "If you weren't enough, you could have grown here." Her voice sharpened. "You left me to bleed alone while you ran." Dylan's eyes filled, but he didn't cry. He just nodded, jaw trembling. "You're right." Cassie held his gaze until he couldn't look away from accountability. Outside the clinic, the storm began to calm. Snow still fell, but softer, like the sky was letting go. Cassie glanced at the window, then back at Dylan. "This isn't a movie," she said quietly. "There's no magic reunion scene that fixes everything." Dylan's voice cracked. "I'm not asking you to forgive me today." Cassie's expression remained unreadable. "Good," she replied. "Because I won't." Dylan sat up more carefully now, wincing. "I'm staying in town for a while," he said. Cassie's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" she asked. Dylan inhaled. "Because leaving didn't make me free. It made me empty." He looked at her, desperate but steady. "And because I want to do the work I should have done then." Cassie didn't soften. She simply listened, and that was mercy enough. The door opened again. Dr. Hensley this time. She checked Dylan's status, discussed discharge plans, and mentioned the outreach program in passing. Dylan looked toward Cassie sharply. "You're leading that?" Cassie nodded once. Dr. Hensley smiled. "Cassie's been extraordinary. The town's lucky." Dylan's face tightened with a grief that looked like admiration too late. Cassie didn't look away. "Yes," she said. "I built a life." After the doctor left, Dylan spoke quietly. "I'm proud of you," he said, and it sounded sincere. Cassie's eyes held his, unflinching. "Pride isn't the same as presence," she answered. Dylan nodded as if he expected that. "I'll show you," he whispered. Cassie stepped toward the door, hand on the handle. "Do it," she said, "without asking me to make it easy." Cassie walked out and shut the door softly behind her. Her heart was pounding, but her posture stayed calm. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall for one brief second, breathing slow, grounding herself in the present. She wasn't a girl waiting for love to return. She was a woman deciding what love was allowed to be. And inside room 6, Dylan stared at the closed door like it was the first consequence he had ever truly understood. Dylan was discharged 2 days later with a bruise, a bottle of painkillers, and a warning to rest. But rest wasn't what brought him back to town. He didn't return to be comforted. He returned to be accountable, and accountability is exhausting. Cassie heard he'd rented the small house near the feed store, the one with peeling paint and a porch light that flickered. It felt like a deliberate choice, humble, temporary, undeserving of comfort. Cassie didn't go looking for him. She didn't drive past his place accidentally. She didn't ask questions at the diner. Her life stayed disciplined: clinic shifts, outreach planning, phone calls to farms, volunteer coordination, paperwork stacked high. If Dylan wanted a place in her world, he would have to enter it through effort, not nostalgia. The first time she saw him again, it wasn't romantic. It was at the community pantry behind the church, where Cassie was unloading boxes of canned goods from a truck. She turned, and there he was in a plain hoodie, hands in work gloves, a hat pulled low against the cold. He looked too polished for a place like this, yet he stood still, waiting, like he'd finally learned the difference between showing up and demanding. Marla noticed him too and lifted her brows at Cassie. Cassie's face didn't change. She kept moving boxes, her breath visible in the air. Dylan stepped forward, not too close, voice careful. "I heard you needed help," he said. Cassie didn't reward him with warmth. "Then help," she replied, pointing to the stack without looking at his eyes. Dylan nodded once and went to work. He didn't speak to charm anyone. He didn't announce his name. He carried heavy boxes with steady arms, loaded shelves, swept the floor, repaired a broken hinge on the back door. When an older volunteer struggled with a crate, Dylan lifted it quietly, then stepped away as if kindness didn't require applause. Cassie watched without staring. Not because she was impressed, but because she was learning the new shape of him. The old Dylan would have wanted credit. The old Dylan would have made jokes and chased approval. This Dylan moved like a man trying to correct something inside himself, as if each box carried was also an apology delivered through his hands. Cassie remained silent, because words were no longer enough. At the end of the shift, Dylan approached her again. "I can drive supplies for the outreach program," he offered. Cassie looked at him directly, eyes steady. "Why?" she asked, refusing to accept vague goodness. Dylan's jaw tightened, then softened. "Because you're doing something that matters," he said. "And because I spent too long using my life to run from what mattered." Cassie held his gaze, then nodded once. "We'll see. We'll see," was not hope. It was a boundary disguised as a sentence. Dylan didn't argue with it. He simply asked, "When do you need me?" Cassie pulled out her schedule, professional and precise. "Monday, 6 a.m. We leave before sunrise," she said. Dylan nodded. "I'll be there." Cassie didn't respond, because promises were not evidence. Monday arrived with the sky still dark and heavy. Cassie pulled into the clinic lot at 5:45, coffee in hand, expecting nothing so she wouldn't be disappointed by anything. The air was sharp enough to sting, and her headlights swept over the empty lot, until they landed on a truck already parked near the curb. Dylan stood beside it, breath visible, hands in his pockets, waiting quietly. For the first time, Cassie felt something shift, not trust but surprise. He didn't greet her with a smile. He greeted her with readiness. "Where are we going first?" he asked, stepping back to open the passenger door. Cassie hesitated for half a second, then climbed in. The truck smelled clean, not like expensive cologne, just soap and cold air and something vaguely like cedar. Dylan drove carefully, both hands on the wheel, like he knew one wrong move could ruin everything again. Their first stop was a farmhouse at the edge of county lines. An elderly couple needed medication refills and a blood pressure check. Cassie moved through the home with practiced warmth, kneeling beside the woman's chair, explaining treatment gently. Dylan stood back, listening, carrying equipment, staying quiet. When the husband offered him coffee, Dylan declined politely, then fixed the loose railing on the porch without being asked. Cassie noticed. Not with softness, just with attention. At the second house, a young mother met them with tired eyes. Her little boy had a cough that wouldn't stop. Cassie examined him, calm and reassuring, and Dylan quietly entertained the child by rolling a toy car across the floor. He didn't look awkward. He didn't look performative. He looked present. When the boy finally laughed, Cassie's chest tightened unexpectedly, because she realized Dylan had once promised her a life like this, then vanished. On the drive back, the sun rose over the fields. Light spilled across the road like mercy. Cassie stared out the window, jaw tight, while Dylan drove in silence, refusing to fill space with cheap conversation. After several miles, he spoke softly. "I'm not doing this to impress you," he said. Cassie didn't look at him. "Good," she replied, "because I'm not impressed easily anymore." Dylan nodded like he'd earned that line too. By the end of the week, he showed up again, and again. Always early, always prepared, always quiet. He carried supplies, fixed small things in broken homes, lifted heavy boxes without complaining, and when Cassie thanked him once out of reflex, he said, "Don't thank me. This is just what I should have been doing all along." The words landed differently because they were followed by consistency. The town began to notice Dylan's presence in new places, not at the fancy events, not at the places where money looked good, but at the pantry, the clinic, the outreach van. He kept his head down, his sleeves rolled up, and the whispers shifted from gossip to curiosity. "What's he doing?" people asked. "Why is he helping?" Cassie heard it all and answered no one, because Dylan's motives were his responsibility. One afternoon, Cassie's car wouldn't start outside the clinic. She stood in the cold with her keys in hand, annoyed and tired. Before she could call Marla, Dylan appeared, hood up, tools in hand. "I saw you from the parking lot," he said, crouching by the engine. Cassie's instinct was to refuse help, to keep distance. But the truth was simple. Her car was dead. So she let him work, and that choice felt like a small crack in a wall. Dylan fixed the problem quickly. Battery connection loose. He wiped his hands, then stepped back, giving her space. Cassie started the engine, relief flickering across her face before she could hide it. "Thank you," she said quietly. Not romantic, just human. Dylan looked at her like the two words mattered more than praise. "You don't owe me softness," he answered. "Not now." Cassie swallowed, because that sentence sounded like growth. And growth was harder to distrust than charm. That night, Cassie sat at her kitchen table with her journal open. She wrote one line, slow and careful. "Consistency is the first language I understand again." Then she stared at the sentence until the ink dried, because she refused to confuse a week of effort with a lifetime of change. Outside, the wind moved through the bare trees like a warning. But inside, Cassie felt something unfamiliar. The possibility of healing. Not because Dylan had returned, but because he was finally learning how to stay. Cassie hated how healing could feel like betrayal. Not betrayal of Dylan, of herself. Because every time she noticed Dylan showing up, a small part of her wanted to believe it meant she was safe again. And another part of her, older and sharper now, reminded her that safety is proven over time, not granted by guilt, not sparked by nostalgia. The outreach program grew fast. More homes, more miles, more stories Cassie carried in her chest. She worked with tired farmers who ignored symptoms until collapse, with mothers who smiled too wide to hide fear, with elderly couples whose love looked like quiet service. Cassie poured herself into the work because it felt clean. Love was complicated. Service was simple. Dylan continued to show up, but Cassie kept her distance. She spoke to him in schedules, directions, and clinical sentences. He never complained. He didn't try to turn car rides into emotional confessions. He listened. He learned. He stayed. Sometimes he would glance at her hands on the clipboard, as if remembering how he once left those hands holding nothing but loss. One evening, after a long day, Cassie walked into her house and smelled something that almost broke her. Dylan's old sweater was still in the closet. She'd forgotten it existed, buried behind winter coats. The scent of cedar and soap rose up like a ghost. Her throat tightened, and without warning, tears flooded her eyes. Not dramatic tears. Quiet ones, heavy and humiliating. Cassie sank onto the bed and pressed the sweater to her face, shaking. She didn't cry because she missed Dylan. She cried because she remembered who she was when she loved him. Open. Hopeful. Certain. She cried because abandonment doesn't just hurt once. It returns in waves, testing the strength you built in calm water. Cassie wiped her face hard, angry at her own softness. Then she stood, folded the sweater, and placed it in a box in the attic. The next morning, she was calm again. Professional. Controlled. Healing was a rhythm now. Break, rebuild, breathe, repeat. At the clinic, she smiled at patients and held their fear gently. When Dylan arrived early, as usual, she nodded once and said, "Route changed. We're heading to Carson Ridge." Dylan simply grabbed the supplies and followed. Cassie watched him from the corner of her eye, refusing to interpret anything as romance. Carson Ridge was where the road narrowed into dirt, where fences leaned tiredly, and the wind sounded lonely. They visited a man with chronic pain who lived alone, his hands worn from years of work and stubborn pride. Cassie checked his vitals, adjusted his medication plan, and spoke to him with the firmness of someone who refused to be ignored. Dylan fixed the man's broken porch step without being asked. The man watched him and muttered, "You're not from around here." Dylan just replied, "Not anymore, but I'm here now." On the drive back, Cassie's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She answered on instinct, expecting a patient. Instead, a voice said, "Cassie, this is Sharon Parker." Her stomach dropped. Dylan's mother. Cassie hadn't heard that voice in months. Sharon continued softly, "I heard you've been seeing Dylan around." Cassie's grip tightened on the phone. "I haven't been seeing anyone," she said, clipped and honest. The silence on the other end felt loaded with regret. Sharon's voice trembled. "I'm not calling to pressure you," she said quickly. "I'm calling to say, I'm sorry." Cassie stared out the passenger window at passing fields, jaw tight. "Sorry doesn't undo the nights," Cassie answered quietly. She heard Dylan's breath hitch beside her, but he didn't interrupt. Sharon whispered, "I know. I watched my son become a man too late." Cassie swallowed, eyes burning. "Then don't ask me to pretend it didn't cost me." When the call ended, the truck felt smaller. Dylan kept driving, knuckles pale on the steering wheel. "I didn't know she would call," he said finally. Cassie's voice was steady, but her chest hurt. "She shouldn't have," Cassie replied. Dylan nodded, shame sliding across his face. "She's right, though," he murmured. "I became a man too late." Cassie looked straight ahead. "Then be one now. Quietly. Consistently." The first real community conflict erupted the following week. A local blog posted photos of Dylan unloading supplies at the pantry. The caption read like a rumor dressed as news. "Town Golden Boy returns. Is he trying to win her back?" People shared it, commented, speculated. Some defended Cassie, others mocked her. Cassie's stomach turned as she scrolled, anger sharpening into steel. At the clinic, whispers followed her like shadows. A nurse asked softly, "Are you okay?" Cassie forced a smile and answered, "I'm busy." But inside she felt exposed, like her pain was being used for entertainment again. When Dylan arrived, he noticed the tension immediately. "What happened?" he asked, voice low. Cassie handed him her phone without speaking. Dylan read the post and something in his face changed. He didn't get defensive. He didn't blame the town. He didn't look for an exit. He walked straight to Dr. Hensley's office and asked for a meeting. Cassie followed, not because she trusted him, but because she refused to be blindsided again. In the office, Dylan stood tall, shoulders squared, humility visible. "I need to address something," he said, voice steady. "And I won't let Cassie carry it." Dr. Hensley raised an eyebrow. Cassie stayed silent. Dylan spoke carefully, like each word had to be earned. "I'm volunteering because the outreach matters," he said. "I'm not paying for publicity. I'm not staging anything." He glanced at Cassie, then back to the doctor. "And if the town wants a story, they can have the truth." Cassie's breath caught. Dylan continued, voice calm but firm. "I left her. I hurt her. That's not romantic. That's failure. And I'm not here to turn it into gossip." Dr. Hensley nodded slowly, impressed despite herself. Cassie felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, but recognition of responsibility. Dylan asked for permission to make a statement at the next town meeting. Cassie's mouth tightened. "That's not necessary," she said quickly, protective of herself. Dylan shook his head. "It is," he answered, "because silence is what broke you." Cassie stared at him, the words landing like a hard truth. He wasn't trying to win her back with romance. He was trying to remove her from the target he had created. That evening, Cassie sat alone in her house, lights low. She replayed the blog comments in her mind like poison. Her chest ached with old humiliation, the feeling of being left, then being discussed as if her suffering was a town hobby. She picked up her journal, but her hands trembled. For the first time in months, she felt the urge to shut down completely. Then her phone buzzed. One message from Dylan. "I won't let them turn you into a story. I'll take responsibility." Cassie stared at the message until her vision blurred. She didn't respond immediately, because a part of her still feared the pattern, men promising protection after causing the danger. But Dylan's actions had been different lately, quiet, consistent, grounded. She typed slowly, each word chosen like a boundary. "Do what you need to do, but don't use my pain to make yourself look noble." A moment later, he replied, "I won't. I'll just tell the truth." Cassie exhaled, long and shaky, and felt something loosen. The next morning, Cassie met Dylan at the clinic parking lot. The sky was pale, the air crisp, the world still waking. Dylan stood beside the outreach truck, posture straight, eyes tired but steady. Cassie walked up and stopped a careful distance away. "This isn't romance," she said quietly, voice firm. Dylan nodded. I know. It's repair, Cassie continued. And repair takes time. Dylan's eyes held hers, not pleading, accepting. Then I'll take the time, he answered. Cassie looked away toward the horizon, and for the first time she believed he might mean it. The town meeting took place on a Friday night. The community center smelled like old wood and coffee. Chairs scraped across the floor, and voices rose in restless clusters. Cassie almost didn't go. She hated the idea of being stared at like a headline, but she refused to hide because other people lacked manners. So she walked in with her shoulders back and took a seat near the front like she belonged there. Dylan arrived 10 minutes later. Alone. No entourage. No flashy coat. No dramatic entrance. Just a man in a simple sweater and worn boots, holding papers he didn't need because this wasn't about facts. It was about accountability. The room quieted in waves as people recognized him. Cassie didn't look at him. She stared forward, refusing to make his return the center of her body. Dr. Hensley opened the meeting with clinic updates, supply needs, outreach schedules, staffing gaps, volunteer sign-ups. Cassie listened, taking notes, grounded in what mattered. Then Dr. Hensley paused and said, "Before we close, Mr. Dylan Harper asked for a moment to address the community." A murmur swelled, curious and hungry. Cassie's stomach tightened, but her face stayed calm. Dylan stood, hands at his sides, not shaking, just sober. He didn't start with charm. He didn't start with excuses. He started with the truth, plain and hard. "I'm not here to entertain you," he said, voice steady. "I'm here because I created pain in this town, and I allowed silence to turn someone's life into gossip." He swallowed, eyes scanning the room once, then landing briefly on Cassie. "I left Cassie," he continued, "and I left without giving her the respect of honesty." The room held its breath. Some people looked uncomfortable, like truth was too heavy to sit with. Others leaned forward as if confession was a show. Dylan didn't feed them. "I'm volunteering with the outreach program because it matters," he said, "not because I deserve applause. I don't." His voice tightened slightly, but he didn't let it break. "And if you care about Cassie, you'll stop using her pain as conversation." Cassie's chest rose and fell slowly. She felt eyes flick toward her, searching for reaction, but she gave them nothing. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was control, and control was something she'd built alone. Dylan continued, "You don't know the nights she carried. You don't know the bills she balanced. You don't know the way she rebuilt while I was gone." He paused, then said, "So don't speak like you do." A man in the back muttered, "So why'd you leave?" The question cut through the room like a blade. Cassie's jaw tightened, because part of her still needed that answer too. Dylan didn't flinch. "Because I was proud," he said. "Because I thought needing someone made me weak." He exhaled. "And because I was terrified that love would expose me." The honesty landed like weight. Cassie felt it, but she didn't let it soften her. Dylan nodded toward Dr. Hensley. "I'll continue supporting the clinic quietly," he said. "No photos, no posts, no statements after this." He looked back at the crowd. "If you want to help, sign up. Donate. Show up." His eyes sharpened. "If you want a story, find one that doesn't involve tearing a woman apart." Then he sat down. No flourish. No pause for applause. The room was quiet. Not because they were impressed, but because they were confronted. Cassie didn't speak after the meeting. She gathered her notes and started toward the exit, hoping to breathe outside before anyone cornered her. But Marla caught her gently. "You okay?" Marla whispered. Cassie nodded once, throat tight. "It wasn't for them," Cassie murmured. "It was for me." Marla squeezed her hand, understanding. Cassie stepped into the cold night air like it was medicine. Dylan followed at a distance, not chasing. He waited near the steps outside the community center, hands in his pockets, posture careful, like he was respecting invisible lines. Cassie walked past him toward her car, keys in hand. "Cassie," he said softly, not demanding. She stopped, but didn't turn. "You didn't have to do that," she said, voice low. Dylan's reply was immediate. Yes, I did. Cassie finally faced him, eyes bright with controlled emotion. You can't undo it with one speech, Cassie said. Her voice didn't shake, but it carried the truth of every lonely night. Dylan nodded, accepting. I'm not trying to undo it, he answered. I'm trying to carry my part of it. Cassie stared at him as if testing whether he meant the difference. You don't get to feel redeemed just because you confessed, she warned. Dylan's eyes held hers. I know. I don't get anything I didn't earn. Cassie's breath came slow and deep, like she was holding her own heart steady in her ribs. Do you know what it cost me? She asked finally, quietly. Dylan's face tightened. Tell me, he said. Cassie's voice dropped, raw but controlled. It cost me my sleep, she said. My appetite, my pride. It cost me the way I used to trust easily. She swallowed hard. It cost me the version of myself that believed love was safe. Dylan's eyes glistened, but he didn't interrupt. Cassie stepped closer, not for comfort, for clarity, for truth to land where it belonged. You didn't just leave a relationship, she said. You left me carrying a future we planned together. Her words cut clean. I had to become my own rescue. I had to rebuild my house from the inside. And every time someone pitied me, it felt like you were leaving again. Dylan's jaw trembled. I'm sorry, he whispered. Cassie lifted a hand. Don't say it unless you can live it. Dylan nodded slowly. I can't change what I did, he said, but I can change what I do from this point on. Cassie's eyes narrowed. How? Dylan inhaled. By staying when it's uncomfortable, he answered. By showing up when you don't reward me. By letting you be angry without trying to fix it with words. By being consistent even if you never choose me again. Cassie's throat tightened, because that last line sounded like love without control, and that was new. A silence hung between them, heavy but honest. Cassie looked at Dylan's bruised face and saw regret carved into it. Not performative regret, the kind that changes how a man moves through the world. She didn't forgive him in that moment, but she felt something shift, the possibility that forgiveness could exist without surrender. Cassie took one slow step back, grounding herself in her own boundary. Then she spoke the sentence that mattered. I'm willing to rebuild trust, she said, but not on promises. Dylan's breath caught. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply nodded with reverence, like he'd been handed a fragile thing. What does that look like? He asked quietly. Cassie's eyes sharpened. It looks like time, she answered. It looks like consistency. It looks like you respecting my no without punishment. It looks like you not disappearing the first time I'm triggered. Dylan nodded again. Then that's what I'll do. Cassie studied him a beat longer, then turned toward her car. Before she opened the door, Cassie paused. Her voice came out softer, not because she was weak, because she was human. I'm not the same woman, she said, staring at the windshield. Dylan's reply was immediate. I know. Cassie glanced at him, eyes steady. And I'm not interested in being loved the old way, she continued. Dylan stepped back slightly, giving her space. Then I'll learn how to love you the right way, he said. Cassie's chest tightened. She didn't answer with romance. She answered with truth. We'll see. Cassie drove home with the heater on low, hands steady on the wheel, heart loud in her ribs. She didn't feel magically healed. She felt something rarer, safe enough to consider the future without betraying her past. Behind her, Dylan watched her taillights disappear down the road, not with entitlement, but with humility. He walked back into the cold night knowing one thing clearly. He couldn't demand redemption. He could only earn it, day by day, until love had proof. The test didn't come wrapped in romance. It came wrapped in opportunity, sharp and familiar, the kind that used to pull Dylan away from anything that felt like permanence. A week after the town meeting, his phone rang late at night, and Cassie saw his shoulders tense the moment he read the name on the screen. He stepped outside her outreach truck before their morning route, speaking in a low voice that carried urgency. Cassie didn't ask questions. She simply watched, because patterns always reveal themselves. When he came back, his face looked tight. Work? Cassie asked. Not accusing, just assessing. Dylan nodded once. My partner wants me in Chicago tomorrow, he said. Big contract. If I don't show, it could cost us months. Cassie's stomach clenched, not from jealousy, from memory. She remembered a suitcase by the door and a promise that dissolved. This was the moment where history usually repeated itself. Cassie kept her voice calm. You should go, she said, even though her chest ached, because she refused to be the kind of woman who begged a man to stay. Dylan stared at her like the words were heavier than the contract. That's what I used to do, he said quietly. Cassie's eyes narrowed. And? Dylan's jaw flexed. And I'm not that man anymore. He exhaled slowly. I built success for years, Cassie, but I destroyed something priceless. Cassie's breath caught because he wasn't pleading. He was deciding. Dylan pulled out his phone, hands steady, and called his partner back. Cassie watched, heart pounding, as if she was standing on a cliff edge. I'm not coming tomorrow, Dylan said firmly. There was a muffled response, sharp enough that Cassie could hear anger through the speaker. Dylan didn't flinch. I'll handle it from here, he continued. Send the documents, I'll meet virtually. He paused, eyes on Cassie. No, this isn't negotiable. Then he ended the call and stood in the cold morning air like a man who'd chosen his life on purpose. Cassie didn't soften immediately. She refused to confuse one brave decision with full redemption, but she felt something shift deep inside, the way a locked door can loosen after years of rust. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Dylan shook his head. Yes, I did, he answered, because this is where it started, me choosing work over us. He swallowed. I won't choose that again. Cassie stared at him, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. The outreach route that day was longer than usual. They drove through back roads lined with bare trees and muddy fields, the sky pale and wide, as if the world was holding space for something new. At the third stop, they found a small farmhouse with a sagging roof and a young father who looked exhausted beyond his years. His wife was in the hospital out of county, and he had 2 little girls with coughs that wouldn't stop. Cassie knelt to listen to their lungs, calm and focused, while Dylan repaired a broken heater vent without being asked. When the father apologized for the mess, Cassie smiled gently. This isn't a judgment, she said. It's care. Dylan looked at the man and said, You're doing better than you think. The father's eyes watered and Cassie felt the weight of the moment. Not because Dylan was being charming, but because he was being present in a way that mattered. This was the love Cassie respected. Quiet, practical, steady. As they left, Dylan carried a box of donated blankets to the porch and didn't even look back to see if Cassie noticed. By evening, Cassie was drained, the kind of tired that settles in bones, not muscles. She drove home alone, heater humming, mind full of patient lists and paperwork. When she pulled into her driveway, she froze. Her porch light was fixed, steady now, not flickering. A small box sat on the step wrapped in plain brown paper. No ribbon, no dramatic note, just a label with her name. Cassie picked it up slowly, suspicious of sweetness. Inside was a new set of medical supplies for the outreach kit, expensive and high quality, and a single card. The card had one sentence written in clean handwriting. Not a gift, an investment in what you're building. Cassie's throat tightened. She set the supplies on the table and stared at the card for a long time. Dylan wasn't buying her forgiveness, he was funding purpose. And he hadn't announced it to anyone. That mattered more than flowers ever could. Cassie sat down, palm pressed to the wood, and felt the quiet sting of hope. The dangerous kind. She whispered to the empty room. Okay, I see you. The next day brought the town's spring festival. Booths lined Main Street, kids ran with sticky fingers, and local bands played songs too cheerful for heart repair. Cassie showed up to manage the clinic's booth, handing out pamphlets, scheduling checkups, answering questions. When she turned, Dylan was there, not beside her, but behind, helping an older man adjust his walker, then lifting a box without being asked. He wore no logo, no suit, no performance, just rolled sleeves and quiet commitment. Cassie watched him and felt her chest ache in a new way. A woman from town approached Cassie with a cautious smile. "I heard Dylan turned down a big trip," she said. Cassie's stomach tightened, protective again. "Why are you telling me?" she asked, voice calm but firm. The woman shrugged. "Because people notice. He's different." Cassie didn't defend Dylan. She didn't accuse either. She simply nodded. "Different is proven," she said. The woman softened. "You're right," she replied. I'm glad you're not alone." Cassie swallowed because the sentence hit a place she rarely let anyone touch. That night after the festival, Cassie walked to the edge of town. She needed air, space, silence that belonged to her. The fields were dark, the sky scattered with stars, and the road stretched like an honest line into the future. She heard footsteps behind her, slow and respectful. Dylan stopped several feet away, hands in his pockets, as if he knew the distance was part of trust. "I didn't want you to go home alone," he said softly. Cassie didn't turn right away. "You can't protect me from everything," she answered. Dylan nodded. "I know," he said. His voice carried no ego, only sincerity. "I'm not trying to be your hero, Cassie." Cassie turned then, moonlight catching her eyes. "What are you trying to be?" she asked. Dylan swallowed, and the vulnerability looked like effort. "A man who stays," he said. "Even when it's quiet, even when you're angry, even when it's not easy." Cassie stared at him, the words landing slowly. She felt the old wound flare, then soften like scar tissue being asked to move. Cassie's voice came out low. "You don't understand what it's like," she said. "To wake up and realize you're building a life alone because someone decided you weren't worth the work." Dylan's eyes shimmered, and he didn't look away. "I do understand," he said quietly, "because I wake up every day and realize I made the biggest failure of my life." His throat tightened. "Not leaving town. Leaving you." Cassie's breath caught, because he finally named it without hiding behind ambition. She stepped closer, one cautious step, like testing ice. "I'm not going to forgive you and forget," she said. Dylan nodded. "I don't want you to forget," he replied. "I want you to remember and still choose me when you're ready." Cassie looked down, fighting tears. "Why?" she whispered. Because she needed the reason to be clean. Dylan's answer was simple. "Because I love who you became," he said. "And because you deserved that love from the beginning." Cassie's eyes lifted to his, and for the first time, she let the silence between them hold tenderness. Dylan reached into his jacket pocket slowly, careful. Cassie's body tensed on instinct, not from fear of him, from fear of being rushed into a moment too soon. But Dylan didn't pull out a ring. He pulled out an envelope. Cassie's brows knit. "What is that?" Dylan held it out without stepping closer. "It's the spare key you left," he said, voice low. "The one you labeled." Cassie's heart stumbled. She had forgotten that envelope existed. He continued, "I found it in a box of your old mail I'd never returned. I kept it because I knew it was true." Cassie took the envelope with trembling fingers. On the front, in her own handwriting, were the words, "Return only with truth." Her throat tightened so hard it hurt. Dylan spoke softly. "I'm returning it to you." Cassie's eyes filled. "Why?" Dylan's voice cracked slightly. "Because the key isn't mine," he said. "The choice is yours. The door is yours. The pace is yours." Cassie stared at him, and that was the moment love felt safe. Not because he wanted in, but because he honored her control. Cassie held the envelope against her chest, breathing shakily. Then she stepped forward one more time, closing the distance fully. Dylan didn't move first. He waited, like a man who had learned patience the hard way. Cassie lifted her hand and cupped his bruised cheek gently, thumb brushing the edge of the bandage like a blessing. "I'm not opening the door tonight," she whispered. Dylan nodded, accepting the boundary. "But I'm opening a beginning," Cassie continued, voice trembling with courage. She rose onto her toes and kissed him. Slow, deliberate, real, and Dylan wrapped his arms around her like a promise made through presence, not words. Cassie didn't go home that night floating on fantasy. She went home grounded in something rarer, peace that had been earned. The kiss wasn't a rewind button. It wasn't forgiveness poured out too fast. It was a beginning, careful, mature, chosen. The next morning, Dylan didn't text her poetry. He showed up. He showed up at the clinic before sunrise with coffee for the nurses and a full outreach kit already organized. He showed up in the back of the pantry, lifting boxes like it was sacred work. He showed up in the homes where Cassie's hands brought healing, and his hands brought repair. He showed up in the quiet, when there was no audience and no applause to chase. And Cassie didn't melt. She didn't abandon her boundaries to make love easier. She kept her standards like a lighthouse, steady, non-negotiable, guiding. But she also allowed herself to witness the truth that actions can carry. Weeks passed, and the town watched something change. Not a romance, a restoration. Dylan stopped being a man who returned only when it was convenient. He became a man who stayed, especially when it was hard. When a storm knocked out power in a stretch of rural homes, Dylan drove with generators and blankets in the back of his truck. When the clinic's funding paperwork hit a wall, Dylan called contacts in the city not to show off, but to open doors Cassie had been knocking on alone for too long. He didn't lose his success. He learned how to hold it without letting it steal his soul. And Cassie didn't lose herself in love. She learned how to let love enter the life she had rebuilt without handing it the keys to her identity. She started laughing again, not the polite kind, but the real kind that surprises you. She started resting without checking her phone. She started believing that love could be safe. Not because it was perfect, but because it was consistent. One evening near the edge of spring, Dylan asked Cassie to meet him by the fields at sunset. The sky turned gold and the wind moved gently through the tall grass like a soft hymn. Cassie arrived cautious, hands in her jacket pockets, eyes steady. Dylan wasn't holding a ring. He was holding a small wooden sign, freshly painted, the letters clean and simple. Outreach Clinic. Opening soon. Below it, in smaller lettering, were words Cassie didn't expect. The Cassie Lane Community Care Program. Cassie's breath caught like her heart had stumbled. "You did this?" she whispered. Dylan shook his head. "We did," he corrected gently. "Because you built it with your pain. I just stopped running long enough to help carry it." Cassie's eyes filled. Not with sadness, with the relief of finally being met. Dylan stepped closer, slowly, giving her every chance to step back. "I'm not asking you to erase the past," he said, voice quiet. "I'm asking you to let the future be different." He swallowed, gaze steady. "I want to keep choosing you. On ordinary days, on hard days, on days when it's silent." Cassie stared at him, her whole life flashing through her. The abandonment, the nights alone, the slow rebuild, the strength she didn't know she had. Then she nodded once. Not because she forgot, because she believed he had finally learned. Dylan exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. He pulled her into his arms, slow, careful, reverent, and Cassie rested her forehead against his chest, letting herself be held without fear. When Dylan kissed her, it wasn't desperate, it was steady, like a promise that had finally found its spine. And in that moment, Cassie understood something she never thought she'd believe again. Second chances aren't about going back. They're about building forward, with truth, with boundaries, with devotion that proves itself in the everyday. If this story reminded you that love can heal without breaking you, subscribe to Redeemed Hearts for more second chance stories that restore hope. And comment, "I believe again," if you're choosing a new beginning, because your heart deserves a love that stays.